What is toxic masculinity?
That's a good question. I don't feel like I'm the right person to answer that. But I guess toxic masculinity to me is it's kind of what we've been talking about, isn't it? It's like the like people that are these like alpha male. They think that like men need to be no emotion. They need to be they're like the top the top people over women, that women are subordinate. There's lots of things that go into toxic masculinity, I think. I feel like you're probably better placed to tell me what you think.
Wally, would you like to give us a take? What's toxic masculinity?
I don't know. I think there is just toxic people in general. I don't know if it comes from masculinity. I feel like if that same person who's like got toxic masculinity, if he was a woman, he'd probably be toxic as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean, but what
But maybe in a different way. Let me think. See, I should have thought about this already. Go on, you tell me what you...
for me, it's like when there's a constant projection of insecurities and you never take accountability and you always blame women for your problems. If you, for example, someone can't get a girlfriend, it's women's fault, not his fault. He's never looked into the mirror, how he presents himself. So you're in that incel culture, like I think is toxic. Another thing is just like
What's that got to do with masculinity though? That's what I don't understand about the term. Why is that toxic masculinity? Is it just because men are doing it? Because I don't find that a masculine thing to do at all.
no, but it's like so when we talk about healthy masculinity, no, that's not a healthy masculine trait.
Yeah, but I
So
just
it's like
don't
toxic
find it as a
because it's like,
masculine trait at all. Like,
but it's because they think they're entitled. They think that all women should be liking them, and it's women's fault. And they, what? Why are they like? It's like this sense of entitlement. Like, why am I repeating myself? So they feel like, how do I word this, man?
I think that's quite an important question to ask. Maybe like, why are some actions specifically toxic masculinity?
Well, I mean, I think that the thing about toxic masculinity is like women don't tend to have these same not to generalize, but definitely in our generation, the reason why people talk about toxic masculinity, it's these like ideas that men should like repress their emotions, that men need to go out and they need to be dominant, and they need to be like all of these, they need to attain for things that are not that
Yeah.
like that women don't tend to.
I feel like
Oh,
that repress your emotions thing, that really makes sense as like something that you'd say is toxic masculinity. But some of these other things, just I don't see why they're associated.
so abusing, like for example, their strength, right? Because
Yeah.
men are biologically stronger, and if they were to misuse that power, like you look at domestic violence, things of that nature would be then a toxic man, right? Like a toxic masculinity. The man has no control over his testosterone levels, and yeah,
I don't know if that's toxic masculinity though. To me, that's just a really bad human being.
yeah, but
The
yeah,
repressing the emotions thing, it's like that is considered like a masculine thing to do, but abusing people isn't considered a...
but because you're powerful, you're physically
Yeah, but that's just
powerful.
the biological reality, to be like men are generally stronger than women.
So they can say the
So
same thing about emotions, that men are generally like, they repress emotions and they're less emotional, less empathetic. So it's that they take it to an extreme
yeah,
level.
it's like a masculine thing to repress emotions, and therefore it's a toxic masculine thing. It's not a masculine thing to like beat up your wife, for example. It's not. It might be masculine to be like big and strong,
Yeah,
but
it's not
not to...
masculine, so it's toxic masculine. Like it's.
I think
But you're right. Like, why are we assigning it to? Why are we bringing the term masculinity into it? Why don't we just
Yeah.
call it toxic behavior? That's a very good question, and I'm like struggling in some ways. It
well
just needs more thinking. I think we've just kind of
I mean, is
we're a
this?
bit on the spot.
I do think like we have to think that this is behaviors that have been perpetuated under patriarchy. So, for example, men abusing their strength and feeling like they can, like beat up women, or like rape culture is perpetuated by patriarchy. These kind of ideas that men are dominant over women, emotions, repressing your emotions, it's kind of something that's perpetuated by patriarchy. Like that's kind of the toxic masculinity side of it.
Or underestimating women, for example. Let's say if a woman was to come into politics, or like what would we consider masculine industries, whether it's the army, they just look down upon. They're not treated as like, what value do you really bring? Like, you're not a man, like,
Yeah, that
we
makes
look at the
sense.
police force, for example, in Pakistan. 2% of the Pakistani women, police force is includes women. So most women can't basically, they can't discuss their issues of like sexual assault and such problems with male police officers. So it's a huge problem. And because women, becoming a police officer is seen as a masculine thing, then women are excluded. They're like, oh, you're a woman, you should just get married and wife and do your feminine things. It's bad to be a police officer. But then because of that, we don't have support systems for a lot of victims that are women. So that would be an example, I think, that can come on the spot. What would be like a toxic masculine trait or system in a society. But I don't I understand this thing very little. I think clearly we need to think more about this.
I mean, this was part of the research. Is toxic masculinity, is it even really a helpful term? Like lots of people think not really. I think sometimes it seems to trivialize, like this term toxic masculinity just trivializes issues that are really serious. Like this idea that like men perpetuate violence onto women, for example, like domestic violence, or like to say that this is like a product of toxic masculinity seems trivial to me. It doesn't seem like the right term to be using. I understand that like saying that men have more repressed emotions, maybe that seems like, okay, that could be a toxic masculine trait. But I do think there's maybe an argument that toxic masculinity has become such a overused term that it's kind of meaningless now. And also, like, if you're a young man and you're trying to figure out your identity and where you fit into the world, and people are only talking about toxic masculinity, I could see that feeling like, I could see why young men would feel like frustrated or maybe confused about why masculinity always seems to be associated with like the word toxic.
Toxic, yeah.
And maybe it's just not that helpful anymore to be describing, if we really want to move forward and be, educating young men and young women together. Maybe using terms like toxic masculinity just isn't that helpful, because it sends off this idea of like masculinity is I don't know, not a good thing, or I can understand why people would have that perception.
What do you think about male privilege? Because I've seen a lot of conversations like, does male privilege exist? Does it not exist?
I mean, there's no doubt that it exists. I think the experiences that like young men and women have are like different in many ways, and sometimes I think that like young men my age maybe, and this is not to say that like literally life is way harder for all women, but I just think that there are certain experiences that young women have that young men don't understand, and that's just because how can they, because you're a man feeling safe walking down the street at night. Young men, you would never understand what it's like to be a young woman and feel like you can't walk home from I don't know, a night out with your girlfriends because you feel like you might be attacked. Or
if you enjoyed this segment, please make sure to like and subscribe. Also, the link to the full podcast is in our description. And finally, I wanted to say that please make sure to follow and download the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so we can bring you more amazing content. Thank you so much for listening.